So I'm going to talk about the importance of usability in Web3, or most people know it as UI UX or research, whatever you want to call it. And this is the things I'm going to go through, so at least you know if this is a boring session, at least you know how many more sections I'm going to go through before you're bored out. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my experience doing product over the last 5 years. Just some context about what we're doing at MetaPulse, because a lot of the examples that I'm going to go through with you is on MetaPulse and our product, as well as going through some of the validation points that we have, the methodologies that we've employed within MetaPulse for research, as well as some of the examples that I can show you, for our usability study. So a little bit about myself. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at MetaPulse itself. Exited 2 startups, traditional SaaS-based companies. And in the past 3 years before I went into MetaPulse, I was doing management consulting and innovation. So I've helped companies like Unilever gather insights from POS systems in rural Indonesia to helping companies like Rolls-Royce with implementing blockchain platforms for traceability for the engine parts. And of course, everything that I've supported them is in the area of UI UX research. So I hope that by the end of this session, you at least get a brief idea on the why, the what, and the how of usability study. It's not going to be everything that I have to cover here because I don't think there's enough time within 30 minutes to cover everything, but I'll try my best. So just a little bit about MetaPulse. So who we are, what we do. Well, MetaPulse are basically desktop companions that eat, sleep, and play on your browser screen. So we are actually a browser extension game. And we're trying to create digital life to foster a genuine sense of companionship. But the whole idea is basically using entertainment as a channel to onboard the next billion non-crypto user into crypto. So why do we need to kind of validate and prove MetaPulse? And this is a overarching, I would say, objective that we have from a usability standpoint. Because firstly, we are a new concept. We're a browser game. We're not a web application, nor are we a mobile application. It's an extension itself as a game. Not only that, we are also targeting non-crypto users. Fun fact, 40% of our whitelists, or waitlist as we call it, are females, which is not a known, I would say a common demographic compared to all the other gaming companies itself. That's because we deliberately went on to target females as a demographic, as part of our persona. And of course, we're also creating a product to basically help assist the transition between Web 2 and Web 3, and that's a lot of education, but it has to be seamless because we're not an education company at the same time. So, why would any one of you creating products out there would want to do a usability study? Well, that's fairly simple, right? So, I think the number one point is that it actually helps you uncover, understand, and identify potential users. So within MetaPulse, we've identified, I think, over multiple interviews. We've done over 150 to 200 one-on-one interviews, and across, I think, 10 surveys, cumulatively 10,000 responses. And it helps you basically segment and segregate the personas that you have and truly understand who are the users that you should target. And of course, because we're targeting Web 2 users itself, it also allows us to understand what are the behaviors like. You have to understand that if you're to apply your product kind of like a blanket way, most of the time it doesn't really work because it didn't work for us, and I'll share some of the case study later on. Now, when we're talking about uncovering new behavioral insights, is that when you are in the process of developing a new product, what you realize over time is that the intended outcome, or the assumptions you have, may not hold true because people from different parts of the world, or even with different context or understanding of what you do, it's actually very different. There's even cultural differences when it comes to product, especially for us because we're targeting the Southeast Asian market. In particular, since it's actually quite a ideal market for gaming. And of course, it allows you to uncover the problems with your product, be it a particular feature, be it a simple button or a simple color scheme that basically tells you that, hey, this is not what users are kind of going through. Right? At the same time, because a lot of what we found is that internally, even for QA itself, there are certain oversights that you will not be able to get unless you're getting an actual user doing it in front of you. And we find it more effective, so we're actually doing a lot of crowdsourcing as a methodology. But I'll share more about our methodology later on. So in general, it's just a very simple 5-step process when it comes to usability study. I'll go through one of them thoroughly because it's actually quite in-depth if you want it to be. So in the planning process, which I'll share later on, it's basically things like setting expectations, document preparations, structuring who, the what, and the why, and of course the timeline as well. To the method in terms of acquiring the data. I'm not sure if you guys have seen as a piece of paper lying around by the Protocol Labs research team. So that's one of the way of acquiring users for research studies when it comes to surveys. But there's a lot, right? There's either going through polls, surveys, user interviews. They could be both external, internal. External in the sense that you're actually recruiting users through user recruitment platforms or market research platforms, and internal is basically your own users, and you basically acquire them through either newsletters or your community that you run, such as Discord, Telegram, whatever that might be. And the method of deploying your research itself really depends on the kind of feature that you're doing. It could be a website, it could be a web app feature, it could be a mobile app feature. You have to understand what fits and what's relevant based on the method they're deploying. The hypothesis and assumptions that you are testing as well, I'll kind of share that with you later on in terms of what we went through as our hypothesis and assumptions, because this would give you an idea of the type of persona that you want to target. And of course, the strengths of your assumptions as well, to basically help you create a feedback loop at the end of the day. When you're trying to formulate the next steps. And of course, going about to actually conducting the tests, and then after that, you consolidate the results, and insights. Usually we try to conduct, I would say, 2 to 3 types of methods of acquiring usability study data so that we get a holistic view of what they are. And then formulating the next steps is basically, all right, what do I actually do with it? You now know that this is how your users behave, or this is how they react to your product itself. Is there anything you can do about it? Which I'll show you one of the examples later on. So as mentioned, I'm kind of diving deep into the planning process of the 5-stage itself. So in terms of secondary research, it does help a little, not too much, because you don't want to spend too much time on primary research. It's actually quite labor intensive, if you guys have not done it, because it not only costs money in the sense that you have to actually pay your users for their time that they spent with you. You can try getting users that really love your product to share feedback to you guys in terms of as part of the usability study, but they're not a good representation across your entire user population itself. Of course, we look at criticality. That's basically mean that how much does this particular feature or thing they're going to test influence the direction of the company itself? Because you want to know, for example, if it's on your website compared to, or in a dot, or it could be a Connect Wallet button in your application itself. How much is that particular feature that you're going to test impact your product? Because that's going to affect, say, user acquisition or user retention in the long run. Hypothesis in terms of the question that you're asking yourself, same thing with the assumptions. The data to be measured, it could be a number of clicks, it could be heat maps, it could be point-based systems when you're doing a survey. So it really depends on the kind of data that you want to be measured. But at the end of the day, it has to be quantifiable, as well as any prediction that you can give ahead, so that at least you know what action we will take and what would the results be. And of course, in terms of fail condition is your prediction falsifiable and specific enough to test, and what results would actually convince us if our belief is actually false. So the planning process is just something that you can follow, but I'm sure that, and this is not applicable to everyone, this is just what we have used as a reference. So I'm going to go about how MetaPals actually conducted a usability test. We will have 3 examples to show you later on. So in the beginning, you obviously want to create a problem that you're trying to solve, or a particular feature you're trying to solve. Try to ideate and pre-plan the kind of information that we'd like to collect. For us, we actually did, we approach for the next few examples that you're going to see as A/B testing. We also do behavioral observation. That means that you have a facilitator basically on the opposite side of the table or screen, observing how the user is basically going through the product. And they have to do specific tasks or complete certain tasks. And if they fail, the facilitator basically make an observation on that itself. So our hypothesis and assumption, so we have about 3 hypotheses and assumptions for the next few examples that I'm going to show you. So obviously the first one is that the nostalgic element. So a lot of our game, I would say, design, including the content, we're using Tamagotchi a lot as a reference point to basically encourage them to own virtual pets. And of course, a way to remind users of the nostalgic past, specifically millennials. And of course, the hypothesis is that any additional elements of nostalgia, such as Tamagotchi gameplay, will entice more people to own virtual pets, right? That's just one of them. And of course, the other hypothesis that we have is also regarding the website, which I'll show you later on, that this was actually trying to test out whether or not it's actually a bad thing, right? So that the left and right movement of our website actually decreases the bounce rate, because people would like to actually go through the immersive website experience that we have. And of course, the assumption is that target personas actually dislike long sign-up process. So from the initial landing itself all the way to them signing up, it can't take too long. And how much is too long, right? So we kind of measure that based on time spent as well as the heat maps itself. And of course, I'll show you how that study actually helped us improve the sign-up rate. And so in terms of testing our hypotheses and assumptions, as I mentioned, for the usability tests, we did a combination of surveys, one-on-one interviews, and behavioral observation. You have to figure out what's best for you. If you are in the early stage of, say, building your product, or let's say you're doing it for a hackathon, whatever it might be, because you don't have any users, and obviously you don't have any budget to spend on paying users to spend time with you, usually we encourage just user interviews or user surveys among your own network when it comes to collecting data. As you reach later stage, you're able to use third-party platforms. Examples are like Pollfish or userinterview.com. These are very common platforms that you can actually recruit users. Now, it's especially useful because if you're just using your own network or in your community, what you end up experiencing is that the data tends to be a little bit skewed. Because if you want to have a global audience at the start, you can't just apply your community itself, because obviously if you're based, say, in Lisbon, Portugal, right? Obviously the context, your marketing, everything is geared and skewed towards Lisbon or even the European continents as a demographic. But it's not necessarily how people are going to react. Let's say you're targeting the US or Asia specifically. And we know this because when we actually did our user interview studies itself in different markets, people actually react differently to the same thing. And of course, in the later stage, say you're doing post-beta or pre-launch, once you have early users that sign up, or even beta testers or alpha testers that have signed up, we're able to kind of look at real life data in a sense. Because the thing is about going through recruitment platforms, or even such as Pollfish or User Interview, is that these are not your real users. So they're reliable, but they kind of fail at a certain stage, and you need a combination of multiple data to understand them pretty well. So in terms of the flow of information, this is an example of what we did for the web page usability test that you'll see later on, as well as our user hub usability test. So for this one, we basically did a observation test. So basically we present a scenario, and for example, you're browsing through social media, you come across a post with this product, you decide to click on a website link, and now you're redirected to MetaPulse.pet. So your task is basically to go to MetaPulse website and go through the website as you normally would and voice out your thoughts. Basically tell us what you think this product actually is and where it leads you to. So what we came up with is this. This is the web page usability test. So our design team obviously came up with the UI on the left, which you can actually find on the website right now. Surprisingly, when we actually show it to around 60 people, over 80% of them don't understand what this little arrow thing means. And then we realized, after trying to understand, so what do you think it actually means? They said they just don't, right? But the actual truth is that this is basically a scrolling icon. And so we realized that when we did an A/B test after that, the scroll to continue UI, that actually improved the time spent by over 80%. And of course, that also then inherently, of course, improve your user acquisition, because people then would understand what we're trying to do, because the entire website itself is an immersive experience. Now for another test is basically what we did on Flora. So Flora is one of our site product that we've launched for MetaPulse, because we wanted to test productivity tools rather than only entertainment, which is games. So for Flora itself, we're able to launch it pretty fast, because it's basically, I'm not sure if you use this product called Focus. It uses the Pomodoro technique, where you're focused on a task, spend 25 minutes, or 5 minutes, whatever it might be, and then if you kind of focus throughout the entire task itself, the plant actually grows, and it's a browser extension. So feel free to download it in the Chrome extension store. But for this usability study itself, we actually have actual users share feedback. What we did is that during the beta stage, we provided them with a list of questions that, okay, these are the things that you can do or we want to be tested. Please go through them, and if you come across anything based on this list of tasks, please submit it through email. And of course, it consolidated into what you see right here. And that allows us to kind of understand a lot of problems early on, because we obviously didn't want to spend a lot of resources on this. So these type of usability tests can help you save resources when you're diverting or you're building multiple products and multiple features. And the next thing that it's a little bit more interesting is actually the user hub. So this is the MetaPulse main product itself. So the user hub essentially is, from a user perspective, as you kind of go through the onboarding process, you download the Chrome extension, and then you land on the main page itself, where you actually start playing the game, and of course going through the tutorial, that entire experience we classify as the onboarding experience of the user hub. And that's actually interesting because we did an extensive study. So this is an example of the initial, I would say, onboarding process. We call it the story mode. And as you can see, there's a lot of stages, right, for any user to go through. But that's because we thought that users would be willing to spend the time to really go through the entire tutorial itself. And as they go through the tutorial, they will actually download the product on Chrome, go through the registration, understanding how the wallets actually work, how the games actually work, and then start playing the game itself. However, the research team did a study, and basically this is the end result of the acquisition mode. So as you can see, the steps have been cut down significantly. And this has basically, in the beta stage itself, improved the onboarding and sign-up process. At the same time, there's a lot of user feedback from a qualitative standpoint that users find that it's actually more helpful to go through the entire sign-up process first and download process prior to starting the tutorial rather than have it embedded as part of the onboarding process. Right? So this is just an example of how with usability tests as well as deep diving down into research, you're able to kind of improve your onboarding process. And again, at the end of the day, what you're trying to improve is user acquisition and user retention in the long run. So yeah, that's just a really quick brief on the usability tests. I can actually spend the whole day talking about this, but I only have 30 minutes, so I'm just crunching all these down together. So I hope that it actually gives you an idea, as you're building your product itself, or as you are kind of preparing for launch. There are some things that you think about, especially from a user's perspective. So if you like to reach out to me, happy to kind of have discussions, conversing with you. I do a lot of advising as well as mentoring of projects, especially from a usability standpoint, because I've been doing product over the last 5 years. Yeah, here's my LinkedIn, Twitter, and the bottom is the Telegram. So thank you.